The scorching sun, a relentless eye in a vast cerulean sky, beat down on the unforgiving landscape of the American West. It baked the earth to a brittle, cracked shell, and the air shimmered with heat. Dust devils, like phantom dancers, twirled across the horizon, ephemeral reminders of the harsh conditions that governed every breath, every movement in these parts. The air itself was thick, heavy with the ubiquitous smell of dry earth and sagebrush, a scent that permeated every fiber of Ethan Vance's clothes, every crevice of his cabin, and every thought in his solitary mind. Ethan, a man whose face was a testament to his life, etched with deep lines from relentless sun and profound solitude, rode his horse, Buster, across the immense, silent expanse of his remote ranch. His days unfolded in a monotonous, almost ritualistic rhythm, mending creaking fence lines that stretched for what felt like endless miles, tending to his small, hardy herd of cattle that somehow scraped a living from the sparse land, and battling the gnawing loneliness that had become his only constant companion since his wife's passing 3 desolate years prior. The nearest town, a collection of sun-bleached general stores and a raucous saloon, was a full day's bone-jarring ride, a place he only visited for essential supplies, always eager to return to the quiet, almost suffocating isolation of his own property. The profound silence of the plains was both his grim comfort and his constant torment. Today, however, the familiar rhythm was abruptly shattered. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, thin and vulnerable, carried on the hot, still air, a weak, reedy whimper. It was a sound entirely out of place in this barren landscape. Ethan, a man whose senses were honed sharp by years of living on the raw edge of civilization, dismounted slowly, his worn leather boots crunching on the dry scrub, the sound surprisingly loud in the stillness. He moved with the cautious grace of a predator, his hand hovering near the cold steel of the revolver at his hip, a necessary, ingrained precaution in these unpredictable and often dangerous lands. He cautiously followed the sound, his eyes scanning the sparse terrain. Hidden beneath the skeletal, thorny branches of a gnarled mesquite tree, a tragic, chilling scene unfolded before him. A small Native American encampment lay still and desolate, clearly ravaged by a sudden, unseen illness or a brutal, swift attack. Tents were askew, some torn, others collapsed. Cooking fires, long dead, were nothing but cold ash. A profound, heavy silence hung over the scene, broken only by the persistent, morbid buzzing of flies, and amidst this silent tragedy, a tiny bundle stirred, a flicker of life in the face of absolute despair. It was a baby, no more than a few months old, swaddled tightly in a tattered, earth-stained blanket. Its cries, though weak, were a fragile, desperate testament to life clinging on in the face of absolute death. The infant, with wide, innocent eyes that seemed to hold the terrifying vastness of the sky and the unfathomable sorrow of its situation, looked up at him. Ethan's heart, long hardened by grief, by loss, and by the sheer harshness of his existence, felt an unexpected jolt, a sudden, unfamiliar warmth that spread through his chest like a trickle of spring water. The choice was stark, brutal in its simplicity. Leave the child to the merciless grip of the unforgiving wilderness and its inevitable predators, or take on a responsibility he never imagined, a life he was entirely unprepared for, a burden that seemed too great for one man. In that profound, silent moment, the isolation that had defined Ethan Vance for years, the wall he had carefully built around himself, was irrevocably shattered. With a deep, shaky breath, he gently, almost reverently, scooped up the tiny bundle. Its minuscule weight in his calloused hands felt like a monumental burden, yet also a fragile, terrifying hope, an unasked-for miracle in a world that seldom offered them. Liked the start of our story? Don't miss the rest. Subscribe to our channel now so you won't miss a single chapter of this amazing journey. Back at his humble one-room cabin, the familiar, comforting scent of wood smoke and old leather was now subtly, irrevocably overridden by the faint, sweet, yet startlingly unfamiliar smell of a baby. It was a scent that spoke of new life, but also of profound helplessness. Ethan felt utterly, hopelessly out of his depth, adrift in an ocean of inexperience. He was a rancher, a man of the harsh land and of profound solitude, accustomed to the company of horses and cattle, not a father. The cabin, usually a quiet sanctuary of predictable solitary routines, now echoed not with his own movements, but with the soft, unfamiliar gurgles and sudden piercing cries of an infant, sounds that twisted his gut with anxiety. He fumbled awkwardly with a dented tin cup, his large, work-hardened hands clumsy and trembling, with the delicate task of trying to warm a small, precious amount of milk over the dying embers of his fireplace. He spilled some, swore under his breath, and tried again, his brow furrowed with concentration. The baby, whom he silently began to call Little Star in his mind, for the unexpected glimmer of hope she unexpectedly brought into his dark world, cried intermittently. Each cry was a raw, piercing sound that cut through his usual stoicism, going straight to his untried paternal instincts, stirring something deep and unsettling within him. The responsibility was immense, overwhelmingly so, a crushing weight on his broad shoulders. He worried relentlessly about feeding her, wondering if he had enough milk or if she needed something more substantial than what his meager pantry could offer. He fretted about keeping her warm during the brutal, often freezing desert nights and cool enough during the blistering, suffocating days. Most of all, he worried about protecting her from the myriad dangers of the land. Venomous snakes, cunning coyotes, the unforgiving elements, and the even more unforgiving human elements that roamed the West. He knew absolutely nothing of Native American customs, nothing of the intricate art of raising a child, let alone an infant, from a culture he barely understood and that his own society often viewed with deep-seated suspicion and prejudice. The loneliness he had grown accustomed to, a quiet, almost comfortable ache that had become part of his identity, was now replaced by a new, more profound and terrifying kind of isolation. The isolation of a single man trying desperately to care for a vulnerable, entirely dependent child in a world that offered very little mercy, or perhaps more critically, very little guidance. He sat on his worn wooden chair, the wood creaking softly under his weight, watching the sleeping infant, her tiny chest rising and falling rhythmically in the faint lamplight. And slowly, uncertainly, a fierce, unfamiliar protectiveness began to stir deep within him, a tender shoot pushing its way through the barren, hardened landscape of his heart, promising something new and terrifyingly precious. Word traveled remarkably fast in the sprawling, often isolated American West, carried by the dusty trails and whispered conversations of cowboys driving cattle, prospecting for gold, and traders moving their wares. News spread like wildfire, even reaching the most remote ranches like Ethan's. The few grizzled cowboys who occasionally passed by his property for a drink of fresh water from his well, or a brief, gruff chat about the weather or cattle prices, soon noticed the tiny new inhabitant of his usually desolate, solitary cabin. Whispers began, hushed and curious at first, then growing into more open, speculative murmurs that carried on the wind. Some expressed genuine concern, their weathered faces etched with a fleeting sympathy for the child's plight. Others, however, harbored thinly veiled suspicion, their glances sharp and judgmental. "An Indian child?" they'd ask, their voices tinged with a mixture of curiosity and thinly disguised prejudice, their eyes lingering on the cabin door as if trying to peer into its forbidden secrets. Ethan, never one for much conversation, offered terse, clipped explanations, simply stating he had found her abandoned. He felt the heavy, unspoken weight of their judgment, The countless unasked questions about why he, a solitary man with no family, would take on such an immense, unusual, and seemingly ill-suited burden. Beyond the immediate social judgment, a more profound and persistent worry gnawed at him: the child's true heritage. He often found himself staring at her small face, wondering about her family, her tribe. Would her people ever come looking for her? And if they did, how would he explain his actions, his desperate, compassionate choice? He feared being seen as an abductor, a kidnapper, or even worse, someone who would mistreat her. He knew, in his own weary heart, that he was doing what he believed was undeniably right, an act born of pure, instinctive compassion. But the world around him was not always quick to understand or accept such impulses, especially when they crossed deeply entrenched cultural and racial divides, lines often drawn in blood and resentment. The stark desert landscape, usually a source of grim, predictable comfort in its unchanging nature, now seemed to mirror the vast, silent chasm between his solitary humanitarian act and the narrow, often prejudiced understanding of others. Each passing day brought a new wave of internal struggle, a relentless wrestling match with the immense weight of his decision and the deeply uncertain future of Little Star, a future that felt terrifyingly dependent on his own flawed, untrained efforts. One scorching afternoon, the relentless sun beat down from a sky bleached pale, turning the very air into a shimmering, oppressive haze that distorted the distant mesas. A lone rider, a figure silhouetted against the blinding light, approached Ethan's ranch, kicking up a small, telltale cloud of dust. It was Sarah, a kind-hearted woman from the nearest town, known throughout the small community for her gentle nature, her sharp, practical common sense, and her quiet, unwavering willingness to help those in genuine need. She had heard the rapidly spreading whispers about the solitary rancher and the Native American baby, stories that had traveled even faster than the wind. And instead of joining in the idle judgment or speculative gossip, she felt a profound, almost magnetic pull to assist. She brought with her a small, carefully wrapped bundle of supplies, a finer, softer woolen blanket, far superior to the tattered, coarse one Little Star had been found in. There were also a few small tins of fortified baby food, a rare luxury purchased from the general store, and some basic, hand-prepared herbal remedies she had made herself for common infant ailments like colic or fever. These were not mere offerings. They were gestures of quiet, profound care. Her presence, when she finally dismounted and approached the cabin, was an unexpected and deeply profound comfort to Ethan, a man who had not felt a truly gentle presence in years. She dismounted gracefully, her movements calm and assured, a stark contrast to his own rough-hewn demeanor. She walked directly to the cabin door, her gaze steady and unwavering. She spoke softly, her voice a soothing balm in the harsh silence, her words laced with genuine empathy and deep understanding. She didn't question his motives. She didn't pry into the specifics of the discovery. She simply offered, her intentions clear and untainted by prejudice. With gentle expertise, she helped Ethan with the baby, her touch light and confident. She showed him how to properly hold her small, fragile body, how to change her with a practiced ease he utterly lacked, and how to gently soothe her cries with a soft, melodic hum that instantly calmed the infant. For the first time since the terrifying discovery in the mesquite grove, Ethan felt a flicker of genuine hope ignite within him, a fragile but persistent flame. It was a sense that he wasn't entirely, utterly alone in this monumental and daunting task. Sarah's simple, unselfish kindness was a small but incredibly significant crack in the thick, protective wall of his isolation, a powerful, undeniable reminder that humanity, even in the harsh, unforgiving West, could offer unexpected warmth, genuine understanding, and vital solidarity. Her arrival was more than just a visit. It was a turning point, a quiet revolution in his solitary, often desperate world. Enjoying this unique tale? Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to keep up with Ethan and Little Star's incredible journey. Your support helps us tell more stories like this. Sarah's visits, initially sporadic, driven by a simple, urgent need to help, began to grow more frequent, settling into a welcome, comforting rhythm in Ethan's previously stark and solitary existence. Her horse's familiar hoofbeats approaching across the plains became a sound he unconsciously anticipated, a subtle shift in the monotonous symphony of wind and distant cattle. She brought not only practical supplies, small bundles of cloth, dried fruits, even a tiny, soft brush for the baby's wispy hair, but also something far more valuable: stories from town, snippets of life beyond the ranch, and, most importantly, invaluable hands-on practical advice for caring for Little Star. Her calm demeanor, quiet strength, and unwavering non-judgmental support were a powerful balm to Ethan's raw anxieties and persistent self-doubt. He began, slowly and tentatively, to confide in her, the words sometimes halting, sometimes tumbling out in a rush. He shared his deepest fears about raising the child, fears of inadequacy, of making a mistake, of failing this tiny, helpless life. He spoke of his growing, undeniable attachment to her, an emotion he hadn't known he still possessed, and the overwhelming, almost crushing sense of responsibility that came with it. The vast, open plains that surrounded them, once a symbol of his harsh isolation, now seemed to hold the promise of a blossoming connection, a future less desolate than his past. Sarah, in turn, recognized the quiet nobility in his seemingly simple act of compassion. She saw past the rough, sun-weathered exterior of the solitary rancher, past his gruff silences, to the man of quiet principle and unexpected tenderness hidden beneath. Their conversations, initially hesitant and focused solely on the baby's immediate needs, grew into a comfortable, unspoken rhythm of shared burdens, quiet understanding, and growing trust. She taught him about different wild herbs that could be found in the dry creek beds, explaining how their properties could be used for calming the baby's colic or easing a fever. She shared simple lullabies she remembered from her own childhood, her voice soft and melodious, showing him how to hum them gently to soothe Little Star to sleep. She even helped him fashion a small, makeshift cradle from an old wooden crate he had lying around, meticulously padding it with soft cloths she had brought, transforming a crude box into a place of warmth and comfort. Their bond, forged in the shared, overwhelming purpose of caring for Little Star, was an unforeseen alliance, a testament to how empathy and a common, selfless goal could bridge deep divides in a world often characterized by self-interest, suspicion, and prejudice. It was a friendship born of necessity, growing into a profound connection that offered a flicker of genuine hope in the vast, empty, often brutal landscape. Despite the growing and invaluable support from Sarah, a lifeline he hadn't known he needed, Ethan still faced profound internal struggles. Doubts, sharp and persistent, like the desert burrs that clung to his trousers, gnawed at him, pricking at his conscience and eroding his hard-won self-confidence. As he watched Little Star sleep, her tiny, peaceful face a stark contrast to his swirling anxieties, the question echoed relentlessly in the silence of his mind. Was he truly equipped to raise this child, a child from a world so inherently different from his own? He often caught himself simply watching her breathe, his heart aching with both love and a terrible fear of his own limitations. He wondered endlessly about her people, about the tribe she came from, their customs and their way of life, and if, by keeping her, he was inadvertently robbing her of her true heritage, severing her intrinsic connection to her roots and her very identity. The vastness of the land around them, stretching endlessly under the expansive, indifferent sky, seemed to magnify his fears, making him feel small, inadequate, and profoundly out of his depth. He was a white man, a rancher. He knew nothing of the complex tapestry of Native American traditions, their ancient languages, their intricate spiritual beliefs, or their long, often tragic history. He wrestled with the knowledge that his own society had inflicted unimaginable suffering on her people. He worried that his efforts, no matter how well-intentioned or heartfelt, and they were undeniably heartfelt, might simply not be enough to truly nurture her identity, to allow her to grow into the person she was meant to be within her own culture. The long, sun-drenched days brought an almost suffocating sense of overwhelming responsibility, the weight of her entire future resting squarely on his shoulders. And the quiet, star-studded nights, once a time for solitude, were now filled with restless self-reflection and a deep, aching longing for guidance that he simply didn't know how to find in this harsh and unforgiving land. He was a caretaker by unforeseen circumstance, burdened by an unexpected love and profound doubt in equal measure, constantly wondering if his selfless act might, in the long run, become a profound disservice, a well-meaning but ultimately misguided intervention in a life not his to fully shape. A week passed in a blur for Ethan, a chaotic mix of sleepless nights, tentative successes in caring for the baby, and the steady, reassuring presence of Sarah. The harsh western sun continued its daily assault, baking the earth into a hard, cracked crust. Then a new kind of rumble began to rise on the horizon, not of distant thunder, but of something far more tangible and immediate, the sound of many hooves. Ethan, standing outside his cabin door, shaded his eyes with a calloused hand and squinted into the vast, shimmering distance. A dust cloud, larger and more defined than any he had ever seen, was approaching rapidly, growing in size with alarming speed. His hand instinctively went to the familiar, worn rifle leaning against the cabin wall, his fingers tightening around the cool metal. Was it a raiding party, a group of desperate bandits, or perhaps a large band of unfamiliar Native Americans seeking trouble or revenge? His heart pounded a quick, heavy rhythm against his ribs as the chaotic shape of the dust cloud began to resolve itself into something utterly astonishing, a massive procession of riders, stretching seemingly for miles across the plains. As they drew closer, the figures became distinct, and to his utter astonishment they were almost all women. The air grew thick with a palpable mix of apprehension and bewildering curiosity. The rhythmic thud of hooves on dry earth was the only sound, growing louder, more insistent, signaling an arrival that would forever change the trajectory of his solitary life. This is getting intense. Don't miss the climax of our story. If you're enjoying this, please take a moment to subscribe and join our community. The ground vibrated and trembled under the sheer weight of their numbers as the contingent of women on horseback reached the edge of Ethan's ranch property. There were easily 100 of them, perhaps even more, a diverse assembly of various ages, physical builds, and backgrounds. Some were clearly Native American women, dressed in traditional, practical attire of buckskin and woven fabrics. Others were settler women, their dresses sturdy and plain, their faces tanned by the sun. They dismounted with a quiet, synchronized dignity, their movements precise and purposeful, their faces a complex mixture of solemnity, determined purpose, and a profound, unspoken curiosity. The very air around them crackled with an almost tangible energy. Ethan, rifle held loosely in his hand, stood his ground near the cabin door, wary but undeniably intrigued by this unprecedented spectacle. He had never seen such a gathering of women, certainly not in this desolate part of the world. The lead woman, an older Native American woman with a regal bearing, her face a roadmap of ancient wisdom, dismounted directly in front of him. Her eyes, dark and piercing, held a profound understanding, yet there was no anger or aggression in her gaze. She spoke, not in the melodic tones of the plains, but with a quiet, resonant strength that commanded immediate attention, her voice carrying clearly in the dusty air. Through a series of gestures and a few carefully chosen words in broken English, she explained their presence. They were from various tribes, both distant and nearby, and also from isolated settler communities, united by an intricate, almost invisible network of communication that had spread the extraordinary news. A lone white rancher had taken in and was caring for an orphaned Native American child. They had come not to confront, but to understand. What followed was an overwhelming, almost biblical display of unexpected generosity and profound human connection. The women, one by one, and then in small groups, began to unload their gifts from their horses and from small, sturdy wagons they had brought. Bundles of soft, supple buckskin, intricately beaded moccasins fashioned for a baby's tiny feet, carefully preserved dried meats, fragrant medicinal herbs known to soothe and heal, small carved wooden toys shaped like animals, and beautifully woven blankets in rich, earthy colors were gently laid at Ethan's feet, forming a growing mound of warmth and care. It was a silent, powerful testament to their collective intention. They brought more than material items. They brought invaluable wisdom. They offered practical advice on child rearing, shared ancient stories of their own tribes and communities, and offered their hands and their hearts for assistance. They spoke, through translators or in halting English, of the profound importance of community, of protecting the vulnerable, and of the sacred duty to bridge divides, even those deeply etched by years of conflict and misunderstanding. The lead woman, through a series of eloquent gestures and more complete explanations, conveyed that Little Star's immediate family was part of a small, nomadic group, and the remnants of her kin had been forced to seek refuge with other, larger tribes after a devastating illness, spreading the word of the orphaned child in their travels. These women, hearing the extraordinary story of Ethan's selfless compassion, had come not to reclaim the child with anger or suspicion, but to offer profound, collective support. They saw not a white man and a native child, but simply a human being caring for another, most vulnerable human being. Ethan, who had spent years guarding his heart, protecting it from further pain and connection, felt it crack open fully, irrevocably, under the overwhelming weight of their collective, profound kindness. The cynicism and suspicion that had long been his companions began to dissipate like morning mist. The 100 women, a remarkable and diverse collective, stayed for several days, transforming Ethan's lonely ranch into a vibrant, bustling hub of unexpected activity. The air, once filled only with the sounds of wind and cattle, now hummed with soft conversation, gentle laughter, and the cooing of the baby. They didn't just offer gifts, they offered their time and their skills. They helped him build a more substantial, intricately carved wooden cradle for Little Star, replacing the makeshift one he had fashioned. They patiently taught him Native American lullabies, their melodies haunting and beautiful, demonstrating how the rhythm could soothe the infant. They showed him how to prepare traditional, nourishing foods for the baby, using dried berries and ground grains, expanding his limited knowledge of infant care. They shared their stories, their struggles, and their wisdom, creating a bridge between their disparate worlds. The initial tension and unspoken suspicion between different cultures melted away like snow in the desert sun, replaced by a deep mutual respect and a burgeoning sense of true community. Ethan learned not just about the practicalities of raising Little Star, but about understanding and appreciating a world far beyond his ranch fences, a world rich with tradition, resilience, and interconnectedness. The women left as quietly and purposefully as they had arrived, fading into the vast plains from which they had emerged. But they left behind far more than just material gifts. They left a profound blueprint for a life no longer defined by stoic solitude, but by meaningful connection, by the understanding that compassion knows no boundaries of race or creed. Ethan Vance, the loner rancher, was no longer truly alone. He had not only saved a baby, but in doing so, had inadvertently opened his own life to a world of unforeseen kindness, profound wisdom, and the powerful, undeniable realization that humanity's greatest strength lies in its ability to connect, to empathize, and to uplift one another, even across the widest of plains and the deepest of cultural divides. The harsh, dusty landscape, once a symbol of his isolation, now seemed imbued with a new, profound sense of hope, belonging, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching. Loner Rancher saved an orphaned native baby. We hope you were touched by this story of courage, compassion, and community. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming and inspiring real-life dramas.